Welcome to Creators and Keepers, the podcast of CultureVerse.org. CultureVerse is an organization which exists at the intersection of art and technology. We seek to use 3D technology and immersive digital experiences to bring unseen art and artifacts to the light of day. We serve the creators and keepers of art, culture, and knowledge. Today, we're speaking with Mike Han. Mike's artwork is influenced by Korean calligraphy, graffiti, modern design, and cartoons. Above all, he strives for balance in his art while working to illuminate the ubiquitous truths of life that are too close for us to see. We recently worked on a two-part exhibit with Mike, The House of Han from A to D, which consisted of openings in Ann Arbor and Detroit, as well as digital work, NFTs, and physical paintings. Welcome to Creators and Keepers, Mike.
Thank you.
Yeah, it's good to have you here. Let's talk about the point in which you decided to become a full-time working artist.
Yeah, because I painted for, I don't know, maybe the past 12 years, and of course, like when I wasn't paying attention in school when I was younger. But like as a grown person, I decided to do it after I was unemployed. I lost my job because of the pandemic. And so I lost my job and my career, I guess. And so I didn't think that I could return back to doing intimate dinners where I did omakase sushi. So I specialized in essentially feeding people by hand, one bite at a time. And that's not very COVID friendly. So I stopped doing that, and I was depressed for 6 months, figured out what I was going to do with my life, or tried to. And that was actually a UX design course that I took at GA, which I thought I was going to do that and like get a real job. And someone paid me to do a mural, or requested for me to paint a mural in their home in November. And that was the time where I had, like, I think 5 months into unemployment, where I'd run out of money. And so like it was great. So I got to paint and I got to pay bills. And so then in that December of 2020, that's when I decided, like, out of necessity, I have to choose to be a full-time artist to try to make money so I could pay rent for January, pay my bills. And I've been a full-time artist since then, which is crazy.
So when we were preparing to publicize the show, House of Han from A to D, you had mentioned that this exhibit was the culmination of a decade's worth of artistic vision. Mm-hmm. And that put things in a different perspective for me, because I didn't realize that when we set out to work with you. Mm-hmm. Tell me what that means to you, and how is this that culmination?
Mm-hmm. Like, I think it's really interesting that it's both that and it's also a beginning, right? Mm. So the House of Han was discovered, at least by me, this year, right? And that was something that I have been, that has been before me. And just like, you know, all of my work for the past 10 years, none of it seemed to match. Like, none of it seemed to hang together, where I would paint, you know, and do some things, and I would make sushi, and I'd worked to try to open up, over the past decade, 4 different restaurants. One of them opened, and I got kicked out of it after 3 months. It was inside a food hall. It was great. Highly recommend getting kicked out of an establishment you work very hard to earn a spot in. So the efforts to make art and make a living, and also, you know, separately make sushi and make a living, that they were tied, you know, in my brain anyways, that everybody's like, you need to, like, focus on something. And I'm like, I am. Just people couldn't understand it. And so for me, they were deeply connected. And the process in which I make sushi, the way I cut fish, the way in which I treat my materials, whether they're inorganic or organic, it's the same. The message is the same. In sushi, it's just way more real. Like, for the restaurant that I was going to open in Ann Arbor, I got live fish, live tilapia, and I killed them myself so that I could nourish my guests. And that's true whether or not I'm killing the fish or somebody else is killing the fish, or killing a cow, or killing a pig, or killing a whatever, right? That's food. We don't think about food that way, that like somebody had to kill this thing in order for me to eat it, right? And then cut it apart and whatever, and then bring it to me. So with art, at least in my practice now, that's how I treat the materials. It's the same way. It's something dies at my hand, right? I'm choosing to kill something in order to make something new, to nourish people with, bring joy, right? It's the result of murder, like murdering trees, for our enjoyment, right? Like, so I don't want to think about these things morbidly, but I think death is a part of life. And my failures have been the result of, where I am today, in getting to do this work. All of those things were necessary. All the pain and all the failures, all the shortcomings, those are all requirements for me to be the human that I am today. And so the past 10 years of art making, sushi making, and then having an interest in technology, I think that this shows the first time where these things have been all brought together in one show. And that one show was between two different places, or arguably three, right? So the virtual world and then two physical worlds, right? Ann Arbor and Detroit. And my personal connection to these places, that my father immigrated into Ypsi in the early 70s. My mother immigrated into the Cass Corridor in Detroit in the early 70s. And so Ann Arbor, and I was born at U of M Hospital. And so I was born in Ann Arbor, and then I moved to Detroit, and Detroit's my home. And so I have sort of two hometowns. And so connecting them, trying to find place inside both of those worlds is something I'm still not there yet, but trying to do. I'm trying to find space and home inside the digital world, the virtual world. And like the idea of a place, feeling home, feeling like I belong as a Korean American, Korean in America, or being born in America as a first generation to be born here. Home is this elusive thing for me. I've never really felt home, and that sucks. Like in my own skin, in my own body, in places. It doesn't matter. Like that feeling doesn't. It's elusive. So the work ultimately is about that. Is feeling home, feeling like I belong, and then being able to then learn how to live well as a result of feeling like I belong, right? So those two things are why I say it's a beginning, right? Is that through the show, I guess the one thing we didn't mention is through the whole like making digital work, having people buy digital work in person, and then forcing them to go to Detroit to pick up a physical artifact that's made out of carbon, which they expended on the drive to get there. All ridiculous, but then all of that then leads to a dinner where one of for the limited edition NFT that we released, one person won a dinner that I'll make in my home, in my apartment, as a sustainable omakase sushi experience, where then I can then nourish somebody. I can give people life through death, right? And I can then make this whole idea really complete with, how do we live well? How do we do our day-to-day travel, right, between two cities? That's not uncommon. Going somewhere to acquire something that has value, right? That's not uncommon. Eating is something that we do every day, right? So all of these things that we do every day, that's what the show has been about. And so this is what allowed me to kind of speak to every single one of those parts and make it experiential by leveraging technology to then ultimately sit down and have a meal. So,
where do you see your work going now?
Into the metaverse, right? Into outer space, different space. I really like the idea of creating works that don't live in the physical realm, that enhance our physical world. And so leveraging art to make impact, affect people's lives, whether it's one person or 100 people or 1,000 people, like that's what I want, is to always figure out a way that I can do what I say, right? Is how do I have the message actually be something that can be lived, or that I'm choosing to do, right? Whether it's, helping raise funds for something, or like, making people happy, or getting them a free meal, or whatever it is, right? Like, all the different things, that's what I'm interested in. And so I think practical next steps are in the virtual space that we created, that another show eventually, will happen in that space, and that's how I will conduct my art business. So from the physical gallery that lives in Detroit, people won't be paying me for the work that's there. I want them to buy the work once it's hung in the virtual gallery. And then in my online store on my website, that's also, that same experience. People would go into the virtual hanok to be able to buy works instead of a static two-dimensional screen that has, pictures of paintings, right? I want to create something more experiential. And so learning about how to do that side of things more and be more engaged with technology is a big part of what I want to do. But then also see if there's a way to give people an intimate human experience as a result of consuming something digitally.
Beautiful. So when we were with you in Detroit and you were making the physical work for this exhibit, one thing that I really understood about you and the way you worked from spending time with you painting was that your work does not start and end on the paper or on the wall that you're painting on. It really is a conversation. And, I feel like our team, we are now part of those works of art because of how interactive you were with us while you were painting and you were asking for our input and opinions. But the idea of your art being a conversation and being somewhat a record of your thought process is really meaningful and interesting to me. So tell us a little bit about the conversation you're having with yourself while you're creating these works of art.
That's a good question. It's very conflicted, right? Like it's just like black and white, right? The substrate and the thing I'm destroying the substrate with, right? Or that I'm marking it with, right? And that's, just fundamentally every single way I think about it, all of it. It's so creation and consumption, right? The way in which things are made, it's the result of destroying or altering materials that exist. And so it's all from day one, from like just paper, paint, conflict, right? Like I have to take one to destroy the other one. And that's always been hard for me, and then so I painted for a while like that, where I'm anxious in my personal life. I have social anxiety, I have depression, and I'm very like low self-confidence and all that kind of stuff. And like on paper, as silly as it sounds, like when I used to first like start like painting or drawing and stuff, I wouldn't want to do it because I wouldn't want to ruin the one piece of paper, because it's like perfect and it's like beautiful and it's precious, like, and chances are good that the marks I'm going to make on it aren't going to make it better. It's going to become worse, and I'm going to crumple it up into a ball and throw it away, right? And that kind of thing was like, that's so the idea of making things has been very challenging from the beginning of, can I improve if I'm going to act, right? If I'm going to do something, is the end result going to be better than what it was before? And if it's not, then should I do it, right? And so getting started is very difficult. And so over the years, I've been practicing and trying to work through my own personal anxieties and things like that, of anxiety of wasting materials, and then anxiety of dealing with humans, right? So that's where my practice in the past year has really evolved, is and again, I continue to call it a practice, because on both levels, from a material standpoint and from a human level, I have to practice these things, and I have to practice mark making. I have to practice communicating. Both are very hard for me to do. I don't particularly enjoy them, even though I enjoy the results, which is very weird, right? So everything for me is like super polarized. There's a dichotomy sort of to every, I see both ends, right? And they're both necessary, and they're both challenging, and they're both rewarding. And so when I talk to some people about some, the process and the work, and people are, some people are like, what, like, you're just spinning in circles. Like, why are you, I'm like, cause like, this is how my brain works. I think of like the positives of, making something, but then I also think of the drawbacks of making something, and I can't help it, so I don't know if I'm doing good, if I'm making something that's valuable, or good, or if I'm doing something bad, if I'm destroying, if I'm wasting time, if I'm wasting materials, or all of that. And so, in this particular work, I explored materials that were true to my heritage, paper that's made by craftspeople with decades of experience by hand in Korea. Again, painting on something like that, it's a huge responsibility. Somebody put in tens of 20, 40 hours of work, right, into making paper, just so I could ruin it in 5 minutes and 10 minutes, by putting ink on it, right? So that's a huge responsibility, I think. So getting over that is, sort of step one. Step two is then the material that I'm adding to that paper is, for this show, is carbon-based. And it's a sequestered carbon. So it's a company, they're called Air Inc., and they've created a new way of capturing carbon from factories. I think there's like 2 specific types of pollutants that they harness in order to make a dense, highly rich, pigmented ink that's safe to use and just really beautiful. And so in concept, working with a material that is the result of trying to combat air pollution, that's a material that I think is worth using, right? It's something that how can I add value, right? How can I create something that's truly adding value instead of just like talking about value of making money, right? Like, and so thinking about my materials, whether it's salvaging, things, or working with new materials like handmade paper, like all of these decisions are very important to me. And so I think it's hard to make those decisions, but once they're made, and the mark, like during a conversation, right? But before making the paintings, it was really intense, and it was very conflicted, right? Where I explained how making salvaging things, and painting on blueprints that I had found and all that kind of stuff, and like making art, giving them new life and all this stuff, like it's like great, right? The story is great up to that point, right? And it's beautiful and it's added value, whatever. And then as soon as I go to get it framed and I put it behind glass and I cut down a tree to make the frame and the mat, right? Like, and the glass will last for 1,000,000 years, right? Like, and this work then is then preserved for I don't know how long, at least my lifetime, because I'm going to keep the thing that I just framed, or somebody else will. But as soon as it no longer, you see paintings all the time at garage sales, right? So in all likelihood, after a few decades, this thing's going to go in the garbage, right? So there's just going to be more stuff on the pile. But now it's not going to decompose as easily, because if I would have done nothing, that piece of paper would be decomposing right now. I found it 10 years ago inside the Packard plant, right? The ones that we were talking about. And so doing nothing in that scenario, totally sustainable, right? Versus what I've done to advocate for sustainability is I've created more waste, right? Longer lasting waste, for the sake of adding value. And, that's not egotistical at all, right? Thinking that I'm going to make something that's going to last for 1,000,000 years, and people are going to, want to know my name and care about my work for 1,000,000 years. Like, that's absurd. It's absurd. So, so that's where like these paintings, they're very aggressive. There's a lot of emotion in them, and paint splatter, and because sustainability for me is very challenging. I don't know how to do it. I want to do it. I don't know if we can do it. Just like altruism, right? Like, but so. In thinking about how to live well, and how to be sustainable, and how to be nice, and how to be a good person, it's the number one thing that I struggle with because I don't know how to achieve them. Yet at the same time, I'm a human and I'm living today and I have to do something. I can't not do anything. It's just not possible. So if I'm going to do something, then I have to make like baby steps, right? Like little progress. So the work has very much been focused on the journey, right? If I don't know what the outcome can be and how, it's all gonna I have to take a daily practical step, and so that's what these paintings essentially are. This meditative left right foot, left foot right foot kind of practice, and following an organic way with some consciousness, with some mindfulness of materials that are involved, and that's as good as I can do. But at the same time, I'm very conflicted by the overarching zoomed out view of this is silly. So I don't know.
Well, and that's what I think the thing that I'm sitting with at the moment is you are sitting with that internal conflict, and these decisions that we have to go through every day, when you really do understand and think about your place in the world and your impact on the environment, it's almost enough to paralyze you to no movement at all. Yet you persist as an artist, and once you start making the marks on the paper, it is as if you've made those decisions, right? You're very decisive once you start painting. Mm-hmm. And I'm wondering about, what are you feeling when you're painting and when you're making the marks? Because you can't hesitate with the way you work.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. It's really nice that the process is one step at a time, right? I'm not painting a landscape, right? And I don't know the final composition, right? So the idea is simply, the premise is find balance. You have a sheet of paper, canvas, whatever it is, whatever size it is, find balance. That's the goal. And it starts with one mark, right? It has to. And that mark or character, whatever it is, that first thing then leads to the next thing. And then once those marks are made, then I have to assess and figure out where the next one goes. And how do you balance a hard shape, a rectangular shape with an organic shape, right? How do you blend these two very different shapes to create balance, right? And so in following that process, with the premise of originally creating, I used to paint or draw, a lot more illustrative, loved cartoons when I was little, right? So I used to do a lot more of that, and the work has become more and more pushed into abstraction, where these characters are now at the basic level like an outline and eyes, right? That's essentially all that's left. And then when I paint, then the characters, right, they kind of borrow shapes, from each other, eyes from each other, or outlines from each other, or whatever it may be, right? And I don't want people to see, they can see it however they want to see it, but for me, that premise is very important. So the idea of one character and many characters being involved in creating the whole composition, that it's that's the paintings are life in my mind, where you need strong individuals. You need to have uniqueness, right? They're not all the same shape, right? They're all not the same character, repeated throughout the whole thing. They're all subtly different. And so the integration of all of the combination of all those things makes up the whole. And so in life, that's exactly, how we are, is we're all individuals. And we need to be strong individuals in order to participate in a society, right? To have a strong community, right? And so I learn about my life and how to live life through the very basic ways of making marks, and through this premise of, we need all the individuals. If one of the individuals is gone, you can't have, the whole. And we need to find balance, or we should try to find balance in our lives, and just be mindful that we're all connected to each other. And so those things are what drive the work, and allow me to create, and the end result is, what I enjoy. But the process is just it's one line, at a time.
Mm-hmm. So speaking of humans and connection, I think one thing that's really lovely about how you work and how you interact with your patrons is you hand deliver the artwork to folks. So tell me a bit about why you do that and what that's been like for you.
Yeah, I'm really glad you asked that, because it's like that other part of the work that so first in painting I'm handling my anxiety, right? I'm practicing not daily but sort of making things that push me to figure out how to find balance and clearly define overcome these short-term small problems. The social component of the anxiety is what the delivering of work is now addressing. And so the combination of these two things are I think what has made my work so much more meaningful. Is now there's a purpose, that there was an idea of purpose when I was painting, but now I'm living the thing that I'm telling people, like, this is what it means right now, instead of like being like, yeah, like everybody's connected and all this stuff, and then like peace, like I don't want to talk to anybody, that's how I want to be. I want to just be alone, but I'm lonely. It's very weird, like that feeling of being alone, being lonely, but also wanting to be alone. And so wanting to connect is what I think the work needs in order for it to truly live, right? For the work to be meaningful, for it to have a personal connection to whoever is collecting it, that is then made through a conversation, right? And so by delivering or somebody picking up the work, it allows us to spend time together, which is, I think, the most precious resource that any human has. And so I don't want it to feel like, oh, like I'm giving my time and it's so valuable. It's like everybody's is, right? And we should treat time that way. Is if somebody gives it to you, that's a huge gift. And so I think having that conversation with somebody, sharing time together, those are the moments that make the work meaningful in my mind. Otherwise, they're just like, it's just paint and paper, right? Like, who cares? Yes, it says something, but does it actually mean anything? And that's where I think you have to have the interaction versus buying something out of a gallery where, yes, you're buying the idea, right? And a beautiful image, or sometimes not a beautiful image, right? But it has an idea. But if you can then tie that to an experience where you're learning then how that idea is manifested in the real world. Like, I call myself an artist and designer, even though I'm not really either, like formally, right? But that's how I guess my brain works in creating, is wanting to make things that ask questions that I don't have answers to. I think that's very valuable. But I think it's, at least for me personally, it's unacceptable to spend my whole life just doing that. I think I need to work on the solution as well, on how do I take the questions and think about them critically, and how do I make an effort towards solving them or improving upon what currently exists. So that both of those things are happening now in my work, where I'm making a physical artifact that asks a question, and then I'm doing the work through communication and social interaction that makes me very uncomfortable, to then learn how to be more comfortable with people and explore the idea in a way that helps us both live better. At least that's my hope in those interactions.
Tell me about, I guess, maybe some of the conversations you had that evening, or I guess, were there things that you learned through this process? That's my question, I guess, is through the process of making the work, through the process of having conversations with people at both of the openings, what was reflected back to you that perhaps wasn't intentional, but that opened itself up on this journey?
I think just all the personal connections, right? Like all the personal stories of how the work relates to their lives, when it doesn't on the surface, right? It's not like they've had this Korean American lived experience, right? And that's been by far the most interesting thing for me, is to see how people are able to take ownership of the work and the experiences by relating it to their lives. So I've been uncomfortable presenting my life in this way, right? Where it's like, I feel it's I don't want to be egotistical or overly I'm very low self-confidence and all that kind of stuff. So presenting me, right, a show about me and my work and my family and putting my name on my this is the first time I've ever put my name on a business, right? So these things are hard to talk about yourself, to present yourself to people. But I think because of doing that, because of using technology and painting like a kid and words, doing that about my life and my experiences, that very, basic, I'm not technical, right? And so my non-technical approach, I think, has made it very technology and this cultural sort of experience approachable, where they can then find the theme easily and use that as a way to talk about their lives instead of being so immersed in how academic and smart and brilliant I am as a creator. Like, that's not what any of this ever is or going to be. I'm not that person, unfortunately. My parents probably wish I was, but they love me for who I am, and I'm getting to express me who as I am. And I think that people are responding well to that, and then willing to participate in that way by sharing very personal anecdotes with me along the way. And it's like these are strangers, and we are having conversations like this that start with like, hey, I also tried to kill myself once, right? Like, I also, like, crazy stuff, like when we're talking about really deep pain, and it's like, I've known you for like 7 minutes, right? Like, and we're having a very real conversation, right? And that there's no judgment or anxiety about it, that it's just like, this is a safe place to experience life together. So that's what I'm continuing to be encouraged by, is that it doesn't matter the color of your skin or gender or whatever it is, that people feel comfortable relating their lives in these types of experiences.
Yeah, I think that's really amazing. I think a lot of that openness and vulnerability that you bring to your work and how you communicate to your audience, with whether it's your newsletter on Instagram or it really is very open and vulnerable, and you share a lot of your pain and your struggle and your journey that you're taking as a human as well as an artist. And I think it's kind of a lovely kind of side benefit to the way you are and how you operate in the world, that in turn allows people to be open and vulnerable with you and to share their pain and to also share the joy of connecting. And I think that's a really lovely way to be, that it's not an academic pursuit for you. It is a very personal journey, and you're inviting us all to go on it with you. So we appreciate that.
It's fun. It's hard, but it's fun. It's weird how, for me, it's both, right? Where like, I live for these kind of conversations, and the work is about these kind of things, but they're also like very heavy, right? Like, It's easier to just talk about the weather, right? It's easier to just be like, and keep it surface level, but I think it's interesting to be able to dive deep with people that you don't know very well, as if they were your best friend, right? Like, that's been a very fun experience, and to have a very rich hour, with somebody where you get to talk about all the things that matter and go about your life, and then have maybe a physical artifact as a marker from that experience.
Mm-hmm. And that's honestly like the most human thing that we could be doing, right? And yet it originated with technology.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I'm going to have to sit and ponder that for a bit. Thanks for chatting with me today.
You're welcome. Thank you for having me.
CultureVerse is sponsored by Art Train and Fractured Atlas. We are based in Ann Arbor, Michigan. You can learn more about our organization, our projects, our partners, and how to get involved by visiting cultureverse.org. Our production staff consists of Matt Grossman, Shanley Carlton, Dave Sharp, and Ramin Shaheen. Our music is Anahita and is by Dave Sharp and Rowan Bose. I'm Aubrey Martinson.